So, you want to play 7 Dooms for Sandpoint. Hello and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Today's video is the first entry in my Merry Little SinMas series, and if you don't know what that means, I suggest checking out the playlist in the description. Basically, over the next 6 weeks, I'm covering the story of the Rune Lords of Thassilon in the Age of Lost Omens, preparing players and GMs for Return of the Rune Lords. Today's video is another video player's guide, this time focusing on a very special adventure path from Paizo, 7 Dooms for Sandpoint, the 200th publication in the AP product line. For those unfamiliar with my player's guides, this video will provide a brief overview on the structure and themes of the campaign while remaining light on spoilers. I'll provide a rundown of the setting and lore leading up to the campaign, then dig into some mechanical options players can select to have a thematic connection to the story, including ancestries, classes, and religious options. I'll also be adding a little GM advice at the end, though for the most part I quite like 7 Dooms as is. Before I go any further, I should also lay out my sources for this video. If you're planning to play in 7 Dooms for Sandpoint, you or your GM will need access to the hardcover volume of the AP, as well as the official player's guide provided online. This AP assumes a major level of emotional and narrative investment on the part of your PC into the town of Sandpoint, and the player's guide does a fantastic job of laying out the basic information on the town to get the players up to speed. That said, plenty of other information exists on Sandpoint, due to its relevance to the history of Pathfinder as a setting and a system. The primary source for GMs, and even players to use to add depth to their understanding of the town, is the 2018 1E sourcebook, Sandpoint, Light of the Lost Coast. This is a whole lore book dedicated to the town of Sandpoint, and the surrounding hinterlands in tremendous detail. The only caveat I list here is that players should definitely not read the entire text, as many of the pages contain spoilers for 7 Dooms. I would also suggest that GMs, and possibly players, review Burnt Offerings, Book 1 of the Rise of the Rune Lords adventure path. The events of this book are important to the history of Sandpoint, and have knock-on effects in this AP. Also, spoiler alert, this video must cover some major spoilers for the Rise of the Rune Lords AP, as well as minor spoilers for the Shattered Star and Jade Regent APs. If you want to avoid that information, skip over the history and lore section. With that out of the way, let's start with the campaign outline. 7 Dooms for Sandpoint is something unique among Paizo publications, a 1-part adventure path released in a special hardcover edition. 7 Dooms is the 200th release in the Adventure Path product line, the softcover campaign books which have released monthly since July of 2007. To celebrate this achievement, Paizo put together something special, a double-sized hardcover AP which is all contained in a single volume. More than a traditional adventure, 7 Dooms takes PCs through 8 levels of character progression, starting at 4 and ending at 12. The campaign is set in the town of Sandpoint and the surrounding wilderness, locations with a storied history, even in the magical world of Golarion. While the PCs will spend effectively all their time in Sandpoint and the immediate surrounding area, the PCs will eventually make at least one excursion to a new location, but I won't go into the specifics. A number of mechanical and narrative themes come up throughout 7 Dooms for Sandpoint, and I give James Jacobs a lot of credit for keeping such a long campaign focused on those themes throughout. The most prominent theme is, unquestioningly, nostalgia. 7 Dooms for Sandpoint is a celebration of Paizo's legacy and the world they've created, and so many elements of the story play upon those ideas. If your game group has been to Sandpoint before, this AP is going to hit you right in the feels, bringing you right back to your last visit to the Light of the Lost Coast. The second major theme is the piecing together of complex and ancient puzzles. The PCs in this campaign will be solving mysteries which date back generations or even further, and in some cases, even literally piecing together artifacts which have been broken for thousands of years. Finally, the mechanical theme at the heart of the campaign is the dungeon crawl. The bulk of this AP revolves around the exploration and clearing out of a single large dungeon, which is filled with traps in need of springing, monsters in need of slaying, and treasures in need of finding. And that is ultimately what we are doing in this campaign. The PCs are slowly and steadily working their way through a fun and interesting dungeon crawl. And this is a classic dungeon crawl in every sense of the word. Traps and treasures abound, the PCs can largely explore at their own pace, and the party gets to face a wide variety of threats via combat encounters in tight spaces. Once the PCs enter the dungeon, they begin a simple but satisfying gameplay loop. Discover a new floor, explore it, clear it out, beat the boss, then head back to town, sell loot, advance the side plots in town, and level up. Rinse and repeat. In a lot of ways, this harkens back to the history of TTRPGs, and to Paizo's APs in specific. It reminds me a lot of Abomination Vaults, but also of Shattered Star, The Emerald Spire, and, in some ways, Wrath of the Righteous. By engaging in this narrative loop, the PCs and players are exploring and unraveling history, both the history of Sandpoint as a town, but also the history of Paizo as a company. In-universe, Seven Dooms explores the many tragedies which have befallen the town of Sandpoint since its founding, and how those tragedies might echo into the future, but also have roots which go much deeper than anyone in town realizes. On the meta level, however, Seven Dooms brings the Pathfinder audience back to where it all began, a sleepy town nestled among the ruins of a lost civilization, where goblins, ghouls, and folk story monsters lurk in the hills. This AP reintroduces NPCs, locations, and storylines which Paizo introduced more than 18 years ago, showing how the world has grown with the audience, and giving veteran players a chance to leave their mark on Sandpoint one last time, while opening the way for new players to experience the town where Pathfinder was invented. The callbacks in this AP are prevalent, and range from Rise of the Rune Lords to Jade Regent to Return of the Rune Lords and beyond. Finally, in the classic Paizo style, this AP features the untangling of narrative webs whose threads are woven from the first chapter all the way to the last. There are plots and schemes in this book which span the entirety of the text, and whose mystery elements exist both within the main dungeon and within the town of Sandpoint proper. For this reason, I strongly suggest that GMs write out a narrative map for each major plotline, labeling the major players and noting where and when they are encountered. Correspondingly, I suggest that at least one player keep a fairly detailed campaign journal, since failing to connect the narrative dots might leave certain challenges feeling disconnected or random. Speaking of challenges, what types of challenges can players expect their characters to face in this campaign? Like I've said several times now, Seven Dooms follows a classic dungeon crawl structure. Players will explore the floors of a dungeon in succession, making their way deeper into the structure to face increasingly difficult and dangerous hazards as they progress. The floors of this dungeon feature a lot of tight spaces and winding hallways, so large PCs will likely struggle, and ranged combatants might run into issues with allied positioning providing unintentional cover for enemies. Broadly speaking, each dungeon floor contains about 12 to 15 rooms, filled with a mix of mechanical and magical traps, haunts, and natural or man-made hazards. Each floor typically features at least one named mini-boss and one named boss, though some floors will contain more, and some bosses might travel between floors, creating more dynamic encounters. Beyond that, individual floors tend to feature specific monster themes, which tie together many of the encounters on that floor. That's not to say that all the monsters on a given floor will fit into a nice little box, since Paizo is pretty good at introducing variety, but about half of the encounters on a given floor will fall into one or two categories unique to that floor, with the categories defined in large part by the narrative that that floor entails. For instance, one floor might play host to a group of humanoid cultists, and members of the cult will make up about half the encounters on that floor, with the other encounters representing the threats which they either weren't able to clear out, or which they've bent to their will. Some of the other themes which fill the dungeons might include goblin tribes, constructs, or Darklands denizens like Caligni or Darrows. As players go deeper into the dungeon, however, the themes will begin to break down and intermingle. On top of traditional combat encounters and traps, Seven Dooms makes use of several subsystems described in the Pathfinder GM core. The most prominent of these is the reputation system, which tracks the party's standing with the various factions in Sandpoint. The reputation system is pretty straightforward. It allows the party to accumulate points with each faction in town, based on their decisions and the relationships they cultivate. Higher point totals represent a favorable relationship and might result in significant mechanical rewards. Lower points, meanwhile, represent antagonistic relationships, and might result in mechanical penalties or even additional dangerous combat encounters. Please note, however, that the reputation system doesn't have to be pivotal in this campaign. If your group really isn't feeling it, the GM can remove it entirely without too much work. That said, if your group is really into it, it's also pretty easy to expand upon it and make it even more plot relevant. Beyond the reputation system, the campaign also features a few small social encounters, which feature the influence subsystem. These are scattered throughout the story, but aren't especially prevalent, so a GM could rework them if they aren't to the group's taste. That said, these are definitely secondary elements to the main story, and if you're looking for a major social game like Curtain Call, I would suggest looking elsewhere. Another secondary system, with about the same level of prevalence, is the research subsystem. This system is a bit more closely tied to the themes of mystery and puzzles, but could also be hand-waved away if need be by a GM if the group doesn't like it. Overall, I think these subsystems manage to break up the loop of combat and exploration without being intrusive, allowing the campaign to take a breather without losing track of the mechanical themes. Now, while combat is definitely the primary mechanical tool with which players will engage with the story, there are still plenty of opportunities for non-combat engagement with the narrative. Smart players should build their characters with investment in a number of skills to improve the party's chances at success, both in and out of the dungeon. During the dungeon-crawling portions of Seven Dooms, 5 skills will prove especially useful. Acrobatics, athletics, and stealth will help the PCs navigate and travel the dungeon effectively by balancing on ledges, climbing walls, and sneaking past enemies, respectively. Thievery will help a party to disable traps or hazards, and gain access to secret areas and locked treasure chests. Medicine, meanwhile, will, as usual, keep the party alive in the combat-heavy sections of the game without needing to rely on magic. When visiting Sandpoint, and even on a few occasions in the dungeon proper, the social game will take over. Face characters would do well to invest in both diplomacy and intimidation, though deception will have its moments to shine. Similarly, characters who are better suited to intelligence will get a lot of mileage out of society. Finally, of the skills typically used to recall knowledge, the 3 most prominent are certainly occultism, arcana, and religion. Each of these will be consistently useful throughout the campaign, both in the dungeon and on the streets of Sandpoint. The most useful lore skill for this campaign is undoubtedly Sandpoint lore, though other individual lore skills, typically associated with the various professions in town, will have moments to shine as well. Now let's talk pacing. Seven Dooms is a great campaign, but to get the most out of it, I suggest sitting down as a group and discussing how urgent you want things to feel in the story. Very few events in the narrative are strictly time-sensitive, and so the AP lends itself to a slower, more relaxed pace in which the players and characters can really connect to Sandpoint as a town and the many characters who inhabit it. For groups whose players have been to Sandpoint before, as part of Rise of the Runelords, for instance, this shouldn't really be a problem. They will likely naturally gravitate toward exploring the town and engaging with the NPCs from adventures past. For new players, however, one way to encourage this investment is to pick a few downtime activities which sound appealing, and work toward them between dungeon excursions. Much like Season of Ghosts and Curtain Call, Seven Dooms for Sandpoint is really well suited to downtime activities, and characters who can readily engage with those systems will excel in a slower-paced run through the campaign. A few ideas for downtime activities might include apprenticing to a local artisan or craftsman, of which there are plenty in Sandpoint. Starting a guild or business, might I suggest the Glassworks? Taking up work for the local factions. My favorites are, of course, the Rune Watchers. Romancing one of the NPCs in town. Working with the town leaders to plan the many festivals throughout the year. The Swallowtail Festival is one, but you could draw inspiration from the Lost Omens travel guide for more. And participating in local elections to determine the future of daily life in Sandpoint. If you decide to pursue downtime activities, then I highly recommend that each PC pick up a lore skill related to their choice, like fishing lore, hunting lore, scribing lore, or one of the literal dozens of others. What came before, and where do we start? Unlike a lot of Paizo APs, 7 Dooms for Sandpoint starts the players off not at level 1 or level 10, but at level 4, making them experienced but still low-level adventurers at the start. The AP kicks off with the players in Sandpoint and having earned a generally positive reputation in the town, at least to the extent that the town leaders recognize them as people who can be called upon when adventurers are needed to resolve a problem. But how did the players develop this reputation? The way I see it, your group has 2 options to resolve this question. To run a low-level adventure prior to 7 Dooms, or to make up a new backstory for a new cast of characters. If your group decides to go the low-level adventure route, the obvious suggestion is Rusthenge, a level 1 to 4 adventure set in New Thassilon, just north of Sandpoint. The story of Rusthenge involves the history of ancient Thassilon, tying it thematically back to Rise of the Runelords and the original heroes of Sandpoint. It's a fun adventure, and a solid way to lead into 7 Dooms. That being said, if your group would prefer to create all new characters for this adventure, which is my recommendation for all APs, then Paizo has done something truly special for you. The Player's Guide for 7 Dooms introduces a new mechanic for the party, a choose-your-own-adventure style backstory generation minigame. The way it works is simple. The party sits down with first-level characters, deciding collectively if the party members grew up in and around Sandpoint, or if they were all visitors when they got together. Their choice dictates the first collective adventure. If the PCs are locals, their first adventure is A Night in a Haunted Manor, with hints of the Goonies, Stranger Things, and Scooby-Doo. If they are visitors, their first adventure was surviving a storm on the ship which brought them to town. Each adventure provides the PCs a chance to perform skill checks to succeed or fail, at which point they resolve the plot, then level up, earning gold, potential extra gear, and even hero points depending on their skill check results. After the first adventure, they choose the second from a list of 2, then choose a third from a list of 3. Each adventure levels up the party, provides them with rewards, and builds up their standing with 1 or more factions in town. By the end of the process, the party members are level 4 and are considered competent and well-known adventurers by the people of Sandpoint. This is an absolutely incredible mechanic, and I cannot sing its praises highly enough. What a fun way to quickly build a party backstory which feels unique, but which can be completed in a single session. This is part of a recent trend I've noticed in Paizo's player's guides in recent APs. 7 Dooms and Curtain Call both present different takes on backstory generators. Triumph of the Tusk ties your PCs to a faction in local politics. Season of Ghosts presents you with a choice of a family heirloom and goes so far as to give you a house in town. I really like these attempts at creating deeper and more interesting backstories for the PCs, and I really hope to see more exploration like this in the future. Great work, James. You knocked it out of the park with this idea. For players and GMs, this backstory generation would probably work best as part of a Session 0. Sit down as a group with a pizza and some drinks, and have some fun filling in your backstory, adding in details and fleshing out your characters with connections to factions and NPCs in the town. So, where does that leave us for Session 1? The campaign kicks off when Father Abstelar Xantus, the priest of the Sandpoint Cathedral, invites the PCs to join him for a meal. He has a task which requires the aid of adventurers, and he's considering the PCs for the job. And this is where I need to make a note on the campaign structure. The inciting incident ties back to the events of Burnt Offerings, the first adventure in Rise of the Runelords, which took place about 17 years ago at the time of 7 Dooms. If the PCs are natives to Sandpoint, I suggest that players and GMs figure out what they were doing during these events, and how they might view them after so much time has passed. Based on how the PCs view these events and the characters who participated in them, the GM might need to tweak the motivations behind Father Xanthus's actions. History and lore. Please note, everything I'm about to describe is related to several Pathfinder adventure paths or adventure modules. If you've played through the content in question, the specifics of the story I discuss might vary slightly. Additionally, I'm trying to cover the relevant information as it would be understood by a reasonably well-informed citizen of Sandpoint. For that reason, information which might be known to PCs in the relevant APs won't necessarily be covered in this overview of Sandpoint's history. I'm trying to keep this succinct. Alright, on to the history. 10,000 years ago, God, I use that phrase a lot, the Empire of Thassilon ruled over northern Avestan. Ruled by an upper class of exiled mages from the Aslanti Empire, Thassilon was divided into 7 member kingdoms. Each of these member kingdoms was ruled by a rune lord, an archwizard specializing in one of the 7 classic Thassilonian schools of rune magic. Often, these rune lords and the nations they ruled over would go to war with one another, and no 2 rune lords hated each other quite as much as Alasnist and Karzug. Alasnist, rune lord of Wrath, ruled over Bakrakhan, a mountainous and forested nation which specialized in combat training and arms manufacturing. Karzug, rune lord of Greed, ruled over Shalast, the second largest of the Thassilonian kingdoms, which was rich in mineral resources and valuable stone. The border between these 2 nations solidified along a small mountain range called the Rasp. Along this border, rune lord Alasnist constructed her infamous Hellstorm Flumes, enormous towers which could spew streams of fiendish fire for miles in every direction. In response, rune lord Karzug constructed his Sentinel statues, enormous statues of himself, into which he could project his mind to observe his borders. Beyond this, both these structure types contained internal chambers, which could serve as outposts, research stations, or command posts for each nation's military. The Earthfall calamity, however, brought all of this to an end. As the meteor crashed onto Galarian's surface, much of Bakrakhan sank beneath the sea, and the Rasp, which was once a mountain range, became the lost coast of the new land of Varissia. Most of the Sentinel statues and Hellstorm Flumes collapsed beneath the waves of the Varissian Gulf, but those few which remained on dry land eventually decayed and partially collapsed. Nowhere was this more prominent than on a small section of shoreline about a day's ride north of the ancient Irespan, where a river dumped into the sea. This would eventually become the site of the town of Sandpoint. Many thousands of years later, a group of 4 prominent merchant families from the city-state of Magnamar secured a charter from their local government to found a new settlement on the Lost Coast. These families and their allies, called the Sandpoint Mercantile League, traveled up the coast and landed at the mouth of the Turandarok River. Unfortunately for them, the site they chose for their new colony was already occupied. Local Varissian wanderers used it as a frequent and ceremonial way station on their regular journeys up and down the Lost Coast, with the ruins of the Hellstorm Flume near the river serving as an obvious and permanent landmark. Varissian oral history, which once warned of the fire which would rain down from the Hellstorm Flume, now interpreted the fire as the light of a lighthouse, an interpretation backed up by the ruins' modern location on the coast. With the arrival of the Magnamarian settlers, the situation on the coast was primed for conflict. That said, negotiations began peacefully enough, with the settlers promising the Varissians a valued position in the town. These negotiations broke down, however, when a belligerent member of the settlers, one Alamon Scarnetti, whipped his friends into a drunken rage and attempted to raid the Varissian camp. The raiders were stopped immediately and took far more losses than they caused, but the conflict between the 2 factions continued to escalate. The Sandpoint Mercantile League was forced to flee back to Magnamar, and the Varissians in the region demanded blood in retribution. This might have continued to escalate were it not for the interference of one Alma Devrin, a talented negotiator and bard, aligned with one of the Magnamarian families. Alma managed to negotiate the establishment of Sandpoint by offering two concessions. First, the local Varisian peoples would always be welcome in town and would, for the next 40 years, be entitled to 20% of the profits earned by any and all Sandpoint businesses. Second, the local chapel in Sandpoint would incorporate the faith of Desna, goddess of travel, luck, and the night, and the patron deity of the Varisian people. With these two compromises, the Varisians conceded to the establishment of Sandpoint, and the town was successfully founded. For the next 35 years, the town of Sandpoint slowly grew, eventually developing into a flourishing coastal town built around the industries of glass-blowing, lumber harvesting, and shipbuilding, in addition to more traditional farming and mercantile practices. As the town continued to prosper, however, an ancient evil stirred in the ground below. Unbeknownst to the citizens of Sandpoint, the ancient Thassilonian ruins beneath the Old Light contained one of Runelord Alasnist's infamous minor rune wells of wrath. This device, which could collect and build up nascent wrathful energies in the area, flared to life in the winter of 4702, sending out a wave of wrathful energy through the town. This concentrated wrath sought out vulnerable souls to infect, and within the sleepy town of Sandpoint, it found 3 targets of note. The first of these was Longiku Kaijitsu, the head of one of the founding families. Longiku had been nursing a grudge against his wife for years due to her past infidelities. When the distilled sin of wrath washed over him, he became infused with its power and overwhelmed by his own rage. He murdered his wife, then threw her corpse over the cliffs near the manor, hiding his crime behind the veil of suicide. Many in town, however, would question his involvement in the death for years. Unfortunately for everyone, Longiku Kaijitsu would prove the least dangerous of the victims of the sin of wrath. The second heart into which the sin of wrath took root was that of Jervis Stute, a local eccentric artist. Jervis was a bit of a local celebrity. He made a habit of carving beautiful birds out of wood, and would randomly create carvings in the woodwork used in the construction of buildings all throughout town. This personality quirk, coupled with his solitary lifestyle on the island just off the coast of town, earned him much affection from the locals. Sadly, Jervis Stute stumbled upon something in the basement of his shack, a small statuette of a winged humanoid, which he interpreted as a sign from some mysterious entity beyond. What he failed to realize was that this statue was actually a dedication to the demon lord Pazuzu, Lord of the Skies, a leftover artifact from some long-forgotten cult which had occupied the region in ages past. While the evils of Pazuzu couldn't influence Stute directly through such a small artifact, they did make his heart vulnerable, and when the sin of wrath erupted in the winter of 4702, it found fruitful ground. Stute became overwhelmed by the sin of wrath, and found himself transformed into a raving serial killer. He began creeping into town and butchering innocent civilians, earning the nickname the Chopper among the townsfolk. Chopper's reign of terror only came to an end after weeks of coordinated searching, when a lucky break allowed the officers of the town watch to track an injured Stute back to his home on the island outside of town, leaving no doubt of the man's guilt. But, despite his final body count, which numbered in the dozens, Stute would not go down as the most dangerous killer in Sandpoint's history. The third and final victim of the Rune Well of Wrath in 4702 was a young woman named Nualia Tobin. Nualia had been raised in Sandpoint by Father Ezekiah Tobin, a cleric of Desna and the head priest of the Sandpoint Cathedral. Father Tobin had taken Nualia in as his daughter after discovering her as a foundling. Nualia's childhood, however, was far from idyllic. Nualia was a Nephilim, a planar scion whose mysterious ancestry contained traces of celestial influence. In her case, this manifested in an otherworldly beauty and hair the color of new-fallen snow. Sandpoint, despite its increasing prosperity, was still a small isolated town, and the populace had no knowledge of the Outer Planes or their mechanical influences on Golarion. For that reason, Nualia was viewed as nothing short of a lesser angel, a divine being infused with the blessings of the gods, who bore the potential to bless the worthy and heal those in need. This, understandably, put immense pressure on her as a child, and she quickly became isolated from her fellow citizens. This wasn't helped by Father Tobin, who sought to offer Nualia to a convent once she came of age, in an attempt to curry favor with the church hierarchy and earn a better position for himself in a wealthier town. For this reason, he maintained an iron grip on Nualia's social life, pushing any potential friends away and demanding that she live a life of penitence and strict self-control. This all combined to starve Nualia of affection and love, making her incredibly vulnerable to anyone who gave her any attention. When she came of age in 4702, a young man named Delec Viscanta took advantage of her loneliness and seduced Natalia. What might have been an easily forgotten tryst, however, had severe consequences. Nualia became pregnant, and when she revealed this fact to Delec, he abandoned her. Father Tobin was no better, locking Nualia away and insisting that she must atone for her sins and beg for Desna's forgiveness. Finally, Nualia miscarried, the baby in her womb having developed serious complications and developmental defects. In despair, Nualia reached out to the powers above and found herself drawn to a prayer to Lamashtu, the mother of monsters. In this moment of weakness, the rune well beneath Sandpoint erupted, overwhelming Nualia and infusing her with hateful energies. Awakening from her slumber, she rose in the night and locked the door to Father Tobin's chambers. Then she set fire to the chapel, burning the man who had raised her alive, and allowing her the chance to escape into the wild unnoticed. These misfortunes, which all took place in the winter of 4702, became known as the Late Unpleasantness in Sandpoint lore, and it would be many years before the town would recover from them. This recovery seemed to be complete in 4707 AR, when the construction of the new Sandpoint Cathedral was finally finished. This new structure, grander and more permanent than the former chapel, would be the new heart of religious devotion in Sandpoint, and would be run by Father Abstelar Xantus, the new head priest for the town. The opening of the cathedral was to be celebrated in the town's annual Swallowtail Festival. The festivities were interrupted, though, when a force of goblins attacked the town. These goblins were members of the Thistletop tribe, which had recently risen to power under the leadership of War Chief Ripnugget. Luckily, a group of heroes stood up in the town's defense, driving the goblins away. This was not the end of the Thistletop goblins, however, as the heroes went on to discover a conspiracy within the Sandpoint Glassworks. Goblins had invaded the glassworks and murdered Longiku Kaijitsu at the behest of his bastard son, Tsuto. Tsuto, the heroes discovered, was working with none other than Nualia, who had returned to Sandpoint to unleash her revenge upon the community which had ostracized her. Investigating Nualia's plans, the heroes descended into a series of tunnels beneath the town and discovered the highest levels of a subterranean vault called the Catacombs of Wrath, the very structure which housed the minor runewell of wrath which had caused the events of the Late Unpleasantness. That said, the heroes wouldn't make this connection until much later in their story. They did, however, face a lesser demon who had instructed Nualia in the ways of Lamashtu, and defeated a number of sin spawn who might have wreaked havoc upon the town above. Determined to eliminate the threat facing Sandpoint, the heroes set out for Thistletop, an ancient ruin which was, in truth, the only remnant of one of Karzug's sentinel statues. Invading Thistletop, the heroes confronted and killed War Chief Ripnugget, scattering the few remaining goblins under his command. Descending even further, the heroes defeated Nualia's mercenary guards, eventually facing off against the woman herself in the deepest levels of the structure. Nualia's goal, they discovered, was simple: recruit an ancient Barghest trapped within Thistletop to her side, then unleash it upon Sandpoint to destroy the town entirely as an offering to Lamashtu. The heroes finally confronted and defeated Nualia, saving Sandpoint from an almost certain doom. After this resolution, Nualia was, with some convincing from Father Xantus, buried in the Sandpoint graveyard. Unfortunately, Sandpoint's troubles were not over. Soon after the defeat of Nualia Tobin and the Thistletop goblins, a string of horrendous murders struck the town. Numerous individuals were killed at the hand of some mysterious villain and marked with a bizarre 7-pointed star. Early in the list of victims was Katrine Vinder, the daughter of local general store owner Ven Vinder. The same heroes who saved Sandpoint from Nualia stepped up and began an investigation, eventually discovering an infestation of ghouls in the farms south of Sandpoint. The heroes eventually discovered the source of both the murders and the ghouls, a mad nobleman named Aldern Foxglove, based out of a haunted mansion on the Lost Coast between Sandpoint and Magnamar. Invading the mansion, the heroes confronted and defeated Foxglove, but discovered connections between the disgraced nobleman and a far darker plot in Magnamar. They departed to further investigate those mysteries, leaving Sandpoint safe for the moment. The next major event in Sandpoint's history occurred several weeks later, when the heroes returned to town, warning of an impending invasion by the giants from far-off Hook Mountain. Almost immediately after the arrival of the heroes, an assault force of stone giants and large bears attacked Sandpoint. In addition to simple destruction, the giants were actively looking for something, and attempted to take prisoners from the citizens of the town. At the same time, a dragon working with the giants began strafing the town, raining fire upon the poor citizens of Sandpoint with impunity. Only after a long and hard-fought battle were the heroes able to drive the giants away and defeat the dragon, leaving Sandpoint devastated, but far from wiped out. As the heroes set out for the Storval Plateau to confront the giants and ensure the long-term safety of the town, the people of Sandpoint began to rebuild. The citizens of the town were nothing if not resilient, and they weren't about to let something like a giant attack keep them from living their lives. Even then, though, the story of Sandpoint was not complete. Not long after the giant assault, a sinkhole opened up in the center of town. What the people couldn't have known was that this sinkhole formed as a result of increasing activity of the minor Runewell of Wrath. The sinkhole gave access to new chambers in the ancient Catacombs of Wrath beneath the Old Light, unleashing a series of monsters on the town. These monsters attacked several members of the town watch and dragged them into the chambers below. The Sandpoint heroes returned from their ventures on the Storval Plateau and delved into the catacombs, rescuing the few guards who remained alive and clearing the entire complex of threats. The heroes made an important discovery within this site, information leading to the location of the ancient and legendary Rune Forge. All of that, however, is well beyond the scope of this story. What matters for Seven Dooms is the prevalence of the ancient Thassilonian ruins in and around Sandpoint, and the ways in which the denizens of those ruins continue to threaten the common folk even in the Age of Lost Omens. The remainder of the heroic activities undertaken during the Rise of the Runelord's adventure path occurred away from Sandpoint, giving the town a blessed reprieve from any ongoing danger in 4707 AR. The events of Varisia in 4708 and 4709 had little impact on Sandpoint, with the town's geographic isolation protecting it from the wider dangers in the region for some time. The next major event in Sandpoint's history occurred in 4711, when Ameko Kaijitsu, a longtime fixture in the town, a former adventurer, and the purveyor of the famous Rusty Dragon Inn, made an incredible discovery. She was the last scion of the Amatatsu family in Minkai, making her the heir to the nation's throne. Partnering with her longtime friend Shalalu and a new collection of heroes, Ameko set out over the crown of the world to rediscover her ancestral homeland and free it from the oppressors who had taken charge in her absence. While Ameko would eventually succeed on her quest, the outcomes of her adventure would ultimately have little direct impact on the town as a whole, beyond transferring operational control of the Rusty Dragon to Ameko's former manager, Bethana. During the events of Shattered Star, the massive tsunami, which racked the Lost Coast as a result of the rising of the Isle of Zin, did damage Sandpoint, but the damage was blessedly mitigated by the cliff structure of the coastline and the bluffs which sheltered the harbor. Only the docks were substantially damaged, and the people of Sandpoint endured the danger with relative ease. That brings us, largely, to 4724 AR and the beginning of this AP. In the years between Shattered Star and Seven Dooms, life in Sandpoint returned mostly to normal. Which takes us nicely to Sandpoint Today. Before I get into the topic of Sandpoint as it exists today, I want to take a moment to recommend another video. The channel Tower of Tomes released a video 6 years ago titled Pathfinder Lore Welcome to Sandpoint, which is an absolutely incredible overview of the town and all the major NPCs who call it home. Their video goes into way more depth than I do here, and is probably the single best resource out there for getting a grasp on not only the town, but the vibe of day-to-day life there. I strongly suggest checking it out. Today, Sandpoint is, in many ways, living up to its nickname as the Light of the Lost Coast. The town has more than recovered from the dangers of the late unpleasantness, and has even begun to grow and thrive. The economic outlook of the town has been strong for the past decade, and is set to continue in that vein for years to come, and industry in the region is booming. Though small, the town has begun to attract merchants and craftsmen from all 3 major cities in Varisia. This has resulted in a steadily increasing population of 1,240 citizens, the majority of whom are humans, of mixed Taldan, Varisian, and Shoanti descent. Dwarves, gnomes, halflings, elves, Ayuvaran, and Dromar also exist in the town, and even a small number of goblins have settled in the community, something which would have been unheard of and even unthinkable 10 years ago. While Sandpoint is a welcoming community, goblins in particular still face more than their fair share of discrimination, largely due to the town's history with goblin raids. Now, if the citizens of Sandpoint had one unifying feature, it would be their tendency toward gossip. The people of Sandpoint are a very chatty bunch, and the rumor mill in town is extremely active, especially as it pertains to adventuring. The 4 founding families of Sandpoint left a lasting impression on the town's industry. The Devrins established a tradition of brewing in town, which remains strong to this day. They also maintained a strong relationship with the farming community, and established strong ties between the citizens of Sandpoint proper and the owners of the outlying farms for miles around. The Scarnetti family, meanwhile, established the first sawmill in town, though others would follow throughout the region soon after. Despite the Scarnetti's best efforts, some of which were certainly illegal, they never managed to maintain a total monopoly on timber processing. The Valdemar family consisted of experienced shipbuilders, and they established a small but successful shipbuilding business in the town's harbor. The Valdemars have since largely abandoned Sandpoint, in response to the many tragedies which have befallen the town. Finally, the Kaijitsus were accomplished artisans in the glass industry, and established a highly successful glass-blowing workshop, which operated until Longiku Kaijitsu's death during the events of Rise of the Rune Lords. Though the glassworks was abandoned soon after, Sandpoint maintained a strong reputation as a town for artists, specialty craftsmen, and performers of all kinds. This reputation has only increased in recent years, and more adventurers have used Sandpoint as a staging ground for their explorations of Varisia. Geographically, the town is arranged between the Tyrandarok River and the Lost Coast of Varisia, with the waters protecting the town on 3 sides, and a wall and gate protecting it from the north. 2 bridges, the Sandpoint Bridge in the south and the Tanner's Bridge in the north, cross the Tyrandarok River, which empties into a 30-foot deep harbor on the south side of town. Along the harbor, a shipyard and fish market frame the docks, which connect to the open-air market. Generally, the town can be divided into 2 halves: downtown in the south, which is more densely packed, and uptown in the north, which is more spread out. These 2 halves are divided by a short rocky bluff, crossed by a series of roads and paths on the west side of the city. The most prominent structures in the skyline are the Old Light in the west and the Sandpoint Cathedral in the east. While most of the buildings in Sandpoint consist of wood construction, the cathedral is constructed entirely of solid stone, and even the ruin of the Old Light still towers over the other buildings. South of the town proper, across the harbor, 4 manor houses dominate a nearby hill. These houses belong to the 4 founding families of Sandpoint, though only the Devrin and Scarnetti manors are occupied today. Sandpoint is governed from a collection of civic buildings on the western side of town. Both the town hall and the garrison are built right between uptown and downtown. The town hall is a 2-story structure, consisting of a large meeting hall, a series of administrative offices, and the town's vault in the basement. Mayor Kendra Devrin, who's been the mayor of Sandpoint for more than 20 years, is both an elected mayor and a member of the town council by virtue of her status as the head of one of the founding families. She's a benevolent and hard-working leader, and generally works toward the well-being of the townsfolk and the local Varisians in equal measure. She works primarily in the town hall, with the assistance of the town clerk, Shalis Vinder, but she can occasionally be found working out of her family manor south of town. Despite her political skill and success, rumors suggest that she might be preparing for retirement in the upcoming elections. Immediately adjacent to the town hall is the garrison, which serves as the base for the town watch and the arming point for the town militia. It also serves as the town jail. The garrison is managed by Sheriff Baylor Hemlock, the ranking watch officer in town. Hemlock gave up much of his Shoanti identity in taking up the position of sheriff, a fact which irked his remaining family members in town. He is supported nowadays by his wife Kay Tessarani, the owner-operator of the Pixie's Kitten, the local brothel. In addition to these two major structures, the Sandpoint Mercantile League is based out of a large warehouse on the south side of town. The Mercantile League consists of all of the owners of the major businesses in town, and is similar to a modern chamber of commerce. Beyond the town council and Mayor Devrin, the people of Sandpoint are led by the leaders of the Sandpoint Cathedral. The Sandpoint Cathedral is currently managed by Father Abstelar Xantus, an aging cleric of Desna who, nonetheless, remains a powerful force in town politics. Xantus took over for Father Tobin after the late unpleasantness, and oversaw the construction of the cathedral to replace the burned-down chapel. At the time of Sandpoint's founding, 6 deities were worshipped in town. Sarenrae, Shellin, Gozra, and Abadar had been brought by the 4 founding families and their allies, while the faith of Erastil was popular among the settlers who embraced lives of farming, hunting, or timber harvesting. Finally, per the agreement struck at the town's founding, the faith of Desna was included as well, due to her status as the patron deity of the Varisian peoples. Desna has become popular in town since her adoption, and she is now considered as important to the town as the other 5 deities. Beyond these 6 deities, worship of most, if not all, benevolent gods will be welcomed in town, due in large part to the number of adventurers who have passed through in recent years, and brought numerous foreign faiths with them. Immediately outside of the cathedral is the Boneyard, managed by the hard-working Naffer Vosk, a devotee of Sarenrae. Due to the large number of adventurers and trade convoys which pass through Sandpoint, the town plays host to a large number of inns and taverns. The 2 most prominent are certainly the Rusty Dragon Inn and the White Deer. The Rusty Dragon holds a special place in many people's hearts, having once been owned by the legendary Ameko Kaijitsu. The inn, marked by a large rusting dragon statue above the main entrance, is now managed by the matronly Bithana, Ameko's former business partner. Despite Ameko's absence from the town for many years to this point, the tradition of regular musical performances and entertainment competitions continues at the Rusty Dragon. On the north side of town, the White Deer is Sandpoint's other large inn. Less popular with adventurers, but popular with travelers due to its location near the town gate, the White Deer is managed by Garridon Viscalai, the brother of Sheriff Baylor Hemlock. Garridon and his family maintain a strong connection to their Shoanti heritage, and struggle with Baylor's abandonment of his own. The White Deer features large and immaculately clean rooms, but Garridon is forced to keep his prices low to compete with the Rusty Dragon. Beyond these 2 inns, Mavashti's Place is a common lodging site for visitors passing through town, especially Varisian travelers. Old Madame Niska Mavashti was a fixture in the town for as long as anyone could remember, and had been old even at the time of the town's founding. She'd been a skilled harrower and fortune-teller among the local Varisians, and the Sandpoint Mercantile League had built a small manor house for her as part of the deal which founded the town. After her death in 4711 AR, the manor became the property of the city, and has served as a hostel for Varisian travelers ever since. Nowadays, it is managed by the witch Giolin Verneath. Several other taverns are well known in town, providing Sandpoint with a surprisingly cosmopolitan feel despite its relatively small size. Riza's place is owned by Riza Margravi, though her 3 children operate it today in her advanced age. Riza herself is a major part of the tavern's appeal, as she is known to provide fantastic tales to patrons. Many of these tales are directly inspired by her dreams, which are remarkably vivid and creative. Cracktooth's Tavern is well regarded for its weekly performance competitions, further enforcing Sandpoint's reputation as an artistic hub on the Lost Coast. Small tokens are handed out to performers, each one marked with a one-word phrase referring to a place, object, or person in Varisian culture. These phrases are prompts for would-be performers, indicating what they should theme their performance around. Jesk Cracktooth Barini is the owner of the establishment, and is a witty and pointed performer, known more for his keen mind than his jagged, broken smile. The Feed Bag is a hole-in-the-wall tavern which caters to a less-than-savory clientele. Visiting sailors frequent the location, as do Varisian travelers who are associated with the Zarni, the Varisian crime family network. Unofficially, the Feed Bag serves as the headquarters for the Bunyip Club, whom I'll discuss in a bit. Gressel Tenawar, the proprietor, is a towering man, whose gut and shoulders make him nearly as broad as he is tall. His immense size has earned the bar another name, the Fat Man's Feed Bag. A bit farther along the waterline, the Hagfish is a slightly more reputable joint, and is popular with local fisherfolk, as well as travelers and dockworkers, due to the quality of its seafood and the entertainment it provides. The owner, the jovial, one-legged Jargi Quinn, is known for his love of tale-telling, a pastime he has taken to call an yarning, and turned into a type of competition. The Hagfish takes its name for the sole denizen of an aquarium, which Quinn displays proudly. This is Nora, a hagfish, and Quinn's beloved pet. The water in the tank is disgusting due to Nora's secretions, and patrons are offered a prize if they can stomach a cup of it without vomiting. While not technically a tavern or restaurant, Sandpoint Savories is popular among the locals for the quality of its baked goods. The owner is Alma Averton, the widow of Sheriff Casp Averton, who was the last victim of the chopper before he was captured. Alma is a nervous woman who wants little more than a quiet life with her 2 daughters, Arika and Annika. Arika, however, dreams of adventure, and recently departed to take up the life of an adventurer. Except, of course, at my table, where she studied under the heroes of Sandpoint, then set out for Corvosa, just in time to become the hero of Curse of the Crimson Throne, but that's neither here nor there. Finally, the Two-Night Brewery is famous throughout the region for the quality of its beer. Founded by Wade and Gavin Devrin, the cousins of Mayor Kendra, the brewery was a fixture in the town's culture until the death of Wade at the hands of Chopper in 4702. It took many years, but Gavin eventually overcame his grief, and the legendary quality of his brews has returned. One of the ways Sandpoint distinguishes itself is the presence of not 1, but 2 libraries within city limits. The first is the Curious Goblin, which is technically a bookshop, but which is effectively a library, since the owner, Chask Halidon, is far more interested in collecting rare books than selling them for a profit. Chask is a retired adventurer, and used his fortune to populate his shop with an impressive collection of valuable tomes. The other library in town is actually a private collection of books and scrolls within the House of Blue Stones. This monastery, dedicated to Irori, might seem out of place in the small town of Sandpoint, but it's been a fixture in the town for nearly 50 years now. Maintained by the devout monk Jabil Sorn, the House of Blue Stones takes its name from the distinctive blue-tinged stone inlaid into the floor of the courtyard. The basement contains a substantial collection of rare books, but Jabil will only grant access to fellow Irorans, or to a select few outsiders whom she's deemed worthy of trust. Of course, Sandpoint also offers a number of specialty shops, catering to the needs of adventurers. Weapons, armor, potions, maps, and adventuring gear can all be found within the town with relative ease. For those setting out on long journeys, the Way North, located near the town gate, is a shop specializing in maps. Vesnut Peru is the shop's gnomish owner and cartographer. He has an intense love of maps and can produce accurate depictions of both the local hinterlands and broader Varisia. For those seeking protection on such a journey, Sava's Armory is the next logical stop. Sava is a talented weapons merchant, but isn't a blacksmith herself. She does, however, understand the transfer of property runes, and will perform these services for a standard fee. Sava is known to carry a wide variety of weapons and armor, including those enchanted with beginner-level magic, catering to the surprisingly diverse flow of adventurers who pass through the town. She maintains contacts in Magnimar to ensure that she can order whatever a client needs if she doesn't have it on hand. 2 alchemists ply their trade in Sandpoint, Pillbug Potiker and Nisk Tander. Oliver Pillbug Potiker is a talented alchemist, known for the effectiveness and reliability of his concoctions. He's also an unsavory fellow, and rumors suggest he might have some ties to the Bunyip Club or the Zarni. By contrast, Nisk Tander is a slightly more approachable fellow. His alchemical talent is less consistent, however, and there's always a slim chance that an item purchased from his shelves will behave unexpectedly. For a broader collection of adventuring gear, most visitors to Sandpoint stop at the Feathered Serpent. Vorvashali Voon is the owner, and he specializes in odd pieces of magical adventuring gear, from ever-burning torches to talismans of all types. While Voon's inventory is constantly shifting, he maintains connections with contacts in Magnimar, ensuring he can order items upon request. Finally, the herbalist Hannah runs a small medicine and poultice shop, offering non-magical healing and herbal remedies to those in need. She's also the town midwife, and provides birth control and family planning services to the people of the region. Beyond these player-facing shops and businesses, Sandpoint maintains several industrial centers. The Carpenters Guild operates out of a building on Festival Street, and employs a large number of workers in the town. A lumber mill and a grain mill are built along the river, and both are owned by the Scarnetti family. The Scarnetti grain mill is the only functional grain mill in the region, after a string of devastating fires in 4707 burned the other regional mills to the ground. Many, myself included, suspect the Scarnettis of arson, but no evidence ever turned up. Lastly, I want to highlight the Sandpoint Theater, owned by Sirdak Dronkus. Sirdak leverages his connections in Magnimar to ensure that skilled performers arrive in town every weekend to put on high-quality performances for the townsfolk. Sirdak himself is a talented playwright and performer, and fled Magnimar years ago after viciously satirizing the Lord Mayor of the city. He and his husband, Jasper Korvaski, were the suspect of much speculation for years, before making their relationship public in 4708. Now, before I move on to the Sandpoint hinterlands, I should also mention Shroud. Shroud is a mysterious masked adventurer who arrived in the region several years ago. Whoever they are, they have taken up a protective role in town, watching out for women and girls in particular. No one knows anything about them beyond that they seem to only cause problems for those with malicious secrets. Now, beyond the borders of the town lie the Sandpoint hinterlands. Moving south along the Lost Coast Road, travelers will pass a low series of hills before crossing the Cougar Creek. They will then skirt around the rotting brine stump marsh before the road curves gently to the southwest toward Magnimar, about a full day's ride away. Departing Sandpoint from the north is another matter entirely. From there, the road curves sharply to the east, passing the Ravenroost Hills before cutting between the Tickwood and the Shankswood forests. The road continues east for a long time before eventually curving north to begin the long trek toward Windsong Abbey and Riddleport beyond that. 3 major forests cover vast tracts of the surrounding wilderness: the Nettlewood, the Mosswood, and the Whisperwood. In the gap between these woodlands lie a series of farms and homesteads connected by backcountry roads, which supply the majority of the grain, fruits, and vegetables which feed Sandpoint. The most prominent geographic feature in the region, however, is the Devil's Platter, an outcropping of limestone more than 3 miles long and a mile wide. The limestone contains dozens of natural cave networks which play host to dangerous threats, from hostile goblin tribes to ghouls. Some of the caves in this network connect to man-made tunnels, which use the caves as smuggling routes, meaning plenty of bandits also call the Platter home. Even the legendary Sandpoint Devil, a cryptid whose legend has haunted the region for generations, is said to nest somewhere on Devil's Platter. The most notable feature on the platter is doubtlessly the pit, a supposedly bottomless hole in the ground, more than 100 feet across. Many adventurers have attempted to explore the pit, but none have succeeded. The Factions of Sandpoint. 7 Dooms for Sandpoint makes use of the reputation system to allow the PCs to interact with the 7 major factions in town. The specifics of the PC's actions will earn reputation with some factions and lose it with others. As specific factions begin to like the PCs, they will provide them with gifts or favors related to the nature of that specific faction. At the same time, factions who grow to despise the PCs might impose penalties upon them of varying degrees of severity. The first of these factions is the Bunyip Club, a gang of loosely aligned criminals who serve as the Thieves Guild in town. The Bunyip Club is run by the rogue Jabrail Vishki, a career criminal with close ties to the Zarni, who's managed to avoid arrest and conviction for his many crimes. Baylor Hemlock has sought to arrest Vishki for years, but hasn't been able to gather enough evidence to put him away. His motivation is even stronger now, since Vishki has been making attempts at taking over the Pixie's Kitten brothel, owned by Hemlock's wife, Kay Tesserani. The Bunyip Club is rumored to hang out in the Feedbag Tavern, though their hideout is supposedly hidden in the underground tunnels beneath the town. Up next, the Rune Watchers are a group of scholars led by the ever-curious Brodert Quink. Quink is a talented wizard, whose pet theory that the old light was a weapon of war was confirmed during the events of Rise of the Rune Lords. The Rune Watchers meet once every season at Quink's home, and discuss the developments in the region surrounding ancient Thassilon. Sandpoint's history with the Rune Lords keeps them concerned about other Thassilonian threats, which the town might need to face. Other members of the Rune Watchers might include Vesnut Peru, Chask Haladan, and Jabal Sorn, though other members may be present as well, based on the specific events of your Rise playthrough. The Sandpoint Cathedral is another major player in town politics, under the direction of Father Abstelar Xantus. Father Xantus has grown old in the years since Rise of the Rune Lords, and is considering retirement, assuming he can find a worthy successor. He is supported by a number of acolytes, and by Naffer Vosk, the Gravekeeper. Tensions have recently escalated between the Cathedral and the Scarnetti Consortium, but Father Xantus has no intention of backing down in the face of Titus Scarnetti's greed. The Sandpoint Mercantile League is functionally a chamber of commerce for the town, and membership consists of the majority of business owners in the town. Originally, the Mercantile League had consisted of only the 4 founding families, but it has since opened up membership to all business owners. The Mercantile League meets in a warehouse on the south side of town, and is primarily concerned with the economic outlook for Sandpoint as a whole. The Scarnetti Consortium is the name given to the Scarnetti family and the agents they've hired to do their bidding. Titus Scarnetti is the head of the family, and is a cruel, greedy man who is little more than a bully, with plenty of resources. Titus and his family desire total control of the various industries in Sandpoint, and they've mostly achieved it in both the lumber and grain trades. The circumstances which brought them a monopoly on grain milling are certainly suspicious, but nothing could ever be proven. Titus's latest efforts in town involve attempting to turn the townsfolk against Father Abstelar Xantus. The family operates out of Scarnetti Manor, south of town. The Town Watch is the local police and guard force, charged with maintaining law within Sandpoint and defending the town from outside threats like goblin raids. Sheriff Baylor Hemlock leads the watch, which consists of a few dozen full-time or part-time guards. The Town Watch is supported by a town militia, trained fighters among the citizenry who can be called upon in times of need. Additionally, Sandpoint has a long history of hiring adventurers to supplement the town's security forces whenever disaster strikes. Lastly, the Townsfolk faction represents the citizens of the town who do not align with one of the other 6 factions. The people of Sandpoint are largely affable and welcoming, but still suffer from a degree of xenophobia common among small-town folk. They generally want life to continue as it always has, and see no need to seek out trouble. For that reason, they largely oppose the Rune Watchers, for fear that they might bring down some Thassilonian curse upon the town. The townsfolk are led by Mayor Devrin, who works hard to ensure that their concerns are given voice among the other power players in town politics. While these 7 factions have a variety of competing priorities and views, a few recent political challenges have highlighted these differences. First up, 2 prominent leaders in town are strongly considering retirement: Mayor Kendra Devrin and Father Abstelar Xantus. While Xantus is largely free to choose his own successor, Kendra Devrin will need to be replaced via an election, which is expected sometime later this year. The second major issue is the question of the tithe paid to the local Varisian peoples. Originally established during the founding of the town, this agreement set aside 20% of all profits earned in Sandpoint to support the native Varisians, on whose land the town had been built. This agreement had originally been set for 40 years, but a 20-year extension had been approved in 4606. Now the agreement is up for review once again. The Scarnettis, being greedy bastards, are advocating for the abolition of the agreement, while the remaining factions support some degree of maintaining the agreement. Notes for character creation. Now it's time to discuss some tips, tricks, and advice you can use to build characters well suited to 7 Dooms for Sandpoint. Kicking things off with ancestries, a wide variety of ancestries could work in 7 Dooms, in large part because of the open storytelling structure of the campaign. Dungeon crawls lend themselves well to a diverse and even weird party, made up of a wide variety of character types, who could be of basically any ancestry, and 7 Dooms is no exception. That being said, this campaign is, in many ways, a celebration of Paizo's past, and a callback to classic adventure structures, and a fun way to engage with that might be to build characters limited to the core ancestries, giving your party a classic tabletop RPG feel. Especially if your characters are natives to Sandpoint, you might want to limit yourself to the native ancestries. Humans make up the bulk of Sandpoint's population at almost 90%. The remaining 10% are a mix of halflings, gnomes, Ayuvaran, and Dromar. Players who last visited Sandpoint during the events of Burnt Offerings might be surprised to learn that even a few goblins have taken up residence in the town, though the prejudice of the locals against goblin kind is still strong. Beyond these ancestry options, it might be especially thematic for PCs to be planar scions, either descendants of the elemental planes like sylphs or nari, or descendants of the outer planes, the Nephilim. The touch of the planes in a character's ancestry will give them a thematic parallel and connection to a famous villain from Sandpoint's history, and could provide them with a powerful intrinsic motivation. In the relatively small town of Sandpoint, planar scions would likely be seen as particularly exotic, or even monstrous. They will likely draw unwanted attention from the locals. Moving on to the classes which players might consider for their characters, it's important to remember that 7 Dooms for Sandpoint is a dungeon crawl first and foremost. The main method by which the PCs will engage with the narrative is combat, and as such, a very wide variety of classes will fit this campaign. You'll notice that I list a lot of classes for this AP by comparison to my normal player's guides. This is definitely a feature of the AP, not a bug. Looking first at the combat-focused martial classes, nearly anything could work in 7 Dooms. The Swashbuckler has the ability to lean into social skills or dungeon exploration skills, making it flexible, while the Fighter and Monk are similarly versatile with greater emphasis on straight-up damage and maneuverability, respectively. Both the Guardian and the Champion could serve as effective tanks, which will be especially useful in dungeons, and Champions have the opportunity to choose particularly thematic deities. The Barbarian could be an effective frontliner, but I would caution against choosing the Giant Instinct, due to the tight spaces which pervade the AP. Similarly, the Magus could be absolutely fantastic, but I wouldn't suggest the Starlit Span hybrid study for the same tight spaces concern. Finally, the Ranger has some decent potential, but I would suggest diversifying away from simply focusing on the nature or survival skills, as they won't be consistently useful in this AP as written. Actually, 7 Dooms for Sandpoint is the perfect opportunity to play the new Vindicator class archetype from Divine Mysteries. The Vindicator shines in campaigns set in communities where the character's chosen deity is prominent, a description which fits 7 Dooms like a glove. Archetypes which could add some effective martial capabilities to your character in 7 Dooms include the shield-focused Bastion, the armor-focused Sentinel, or the dex-based Duelist. Like the combat martials, basically all the skill-focused martials will work well in 7 Dooms for Sandpoint. The best choice here is probably the Rogue, the undisputed master of skills in the system. All the Rogue rackets are solid options, but I do want to highlight the Avenger, a religious racket which shines for many of the same reasons as the Vindicator Ranger. The Thaumaturge is, of course, a solid choice here, and the weapon, tome, shield, and amulet implements are great options to consider. All investigator methodologies are fantastic choices, and all alchemical research fields, except the toxicologist, are solid as well. The commander is fantastic in such a combat-focused AP, but is probably best as a 5th party member, rather than a member of a conventional 4-character team. Lastly, the Runesmith will probably be a good option, though that's just based on the playtest version of the class. A number of archetypes could add some serious utility to characters in this AP. The Archaeologist is probably the best and most thematic choice, but the Loremaster and Linguist could also add some academic focus to any character. For characters who focus on the face skills, the Dandy and Celebrity are great, and could lead to a lot of fun roleplay in Sandpoint. In combat, the Marshal is great at buffing the party, while the Medic is fantastic at keeping the party alive, as usual. Moving along to the spellcasters, again, a huge variety of options would be great for characters in 7 Dooms. This combat-heavy AP is a great opportunity for kineticists to shine, and all 6 elements offer valuable utility to players. Bards are great in this campaign for both their buffing abilities and their dominance of the face skills. The best muses for this campaign are probably the Enigma and Polymath muses. Wizards have a grand tradition in Sandpoint and broader Varisia, with the history of the Rune Lords visible for all to see in the surrounding landscape. All wizard schools are solid for this AP, but I would probably avoid the Rune Lord archetype for this one. Witches are similarly prevalent in Varisia, and the Inscribed One, Spinner of Threads, and Faith's Flamekeeper patrons are probably the most thematic. Sorcerers are common in the region, and the angelic or demonic bloodlines could have some fun roleplay opportunities with the enemy types in this AP, while the Harrow bloodline could connect to Varisian history, and the Imperial bloodline might tie a character back to the ancient Rune Lords themselves. The Psychic is fun and highly customizable. Of the Conscious Minds, the Infinite Eye, with its focus on divination, and the Unbound Step, with its focus on tactical teleportation, could be extremely useful. Of the Subconscious Minds, the Emotional Acceptance or Gathered Lore options offer the most storytelling potential. Clerics are as good in 7 Dooms as they always are, assuming you consider a thematic deity. Oracles, meanwhile, have the opportunity to shine, with the lore and time mysteries standing out, and the Ancestors mystery being especially cool if the ancestors in question are the historical residents of Sandpoint. Finally, the Animist has a few cool options, with the Crafter in the Vault and the Imposter in Hidden Places apparitions having the strongest thematic ties to the story and the setting. The Harrower archetype has a strong tie to the historical practices of the Varisian people, who make up a large portion of Sandpoint's population. The Familiar Master, meanwhile, is just generally useful, and a Familiar could be a great tool for both roleplay and dungeon exploration. When considering the deities which your characters might follow, I strongly suggest considering the deities who are popularly worshipped in Sandpoint. This will give you the opportunity to connect with the locals, and to interact with Father Xantus and other religious community leaders. The Sandpoint Cathedral may be headed by Abstelar Xantus, who is himself a cleric of Desna, but the structure openly hosts worship services to a number of deities, and welcomes followers of most good-aligned gods. Desna is something of an unofficial patron deity for the town, due to her popularity among the Varisian people and the adventurers whom Sandpoint attracts. In addition to Desna, Shelyn and Sarenrae are popular, and might be worshipped together with Desna as the Radiant Prism pantheon. Abadar and Erastil, meanwhile, are worshipped as deities of commerce, agriculture, and community defense, and this final aspect has the strongest thematic connection to the campaign. Callistria is worshipped to a lesser degree in town, and followers of the Savored Sting could work very well in the social aspects of the campaign. Both Gozra and the druidic Green Faith are worshipped in Sandpoint, and are generally seen as guardians of the natural world. Finally, the subset of the population who are descended from the Shoanti of the Storval Plateau might still practice some Shoanti animism. If you're considering religions beyond those practiced in Sandpoint, I might recommend Ashava, the demigoddess of lost souls and dance. She is popular in nearby Magnamar and among the Varisian peoples, and her followers will have a fun interaction with an NPC during the early chapters. Nocticula, the redeemed goddess of art and the night, could be interesting as well, due to her rise in nearby New Thassilon. Finally, with the story of the local folk hero Ameko Kaijitsu, now Amatatsu, claiming her throne in far-off Minkai, it might be fun to play a character who has recently discovered faith in a Tian deity like Shizuru. Also, before I leave this section, I just want to note that the regional capital of Magnamar is near Sandpoint, and Magnamar famously plays host to cults devoted to many of the Imperial Lords, benevolent demigods of celestial origin. Ashava is one such deity, but another is the Black Butterfly, a servant of Desna. Many cool Imperial Lords exist if you're seeking a little extra inspiration for your character. Closing things out for the player-facing options, let's look at the backgrounds available for PCs in this adventure. Like all Paizo APs, 7 Dooms for Sandpoint presents unique backgrounds for PCs to choose from for their characters. In this case, 8 backgrounds are available. In addition to the traditional skill proficiency and skill feat benefits, these backgrounds also present each character with suggested locations for their home in Sandpoint. Really though, these ideas about where the character might live feel a little bit underbaked. I much prefer the approach taken in Season of Ghosts, so consider working with your GM to give your character a home in town which feels authentic to their backstory. Each background also grants the party an improved or worsened standing with 2 factions in the community. First up, the Cathedral Child background represents characters who spent much of their time in close association with the Sandpoint Cathedral. You might be a priest of one of the locally worshipped deities, or perhaps an acolyte, scribe, or even groundskeeper working for the church. You are accustomed to reading and transcribing religious texts, and have helped the priests heal those in need. Characters with this background might live close to the cathedral, or within the cathedral itself. Your character is trained in religion and the scribing lore skill, and they gain the battle medicine skill feat. This background gives the party +1 reputation point with the Sandpoint Cathedral faction, but -1 reputation point with the Scarnetti Consortium. The Curious Apprentice background is the most narratively complex, and represents characters who have apprenticed to one of the local shopkeepers, or craftspeople in Sandpoint. This allows you to choose a wide variety of professions or interests for your character. Despite this apprenticeship, however, your character maintains a fascination with all things mysterious, occult, or artistic. You are especially interested in occult verse, be it song lyrics, chants, or traditional poetry. Characters with this background might still live with or near their instructor or mentor figure, but might just as easily live elsewhere in town. Your character is trained in occultism and poetry lore, and gains the Hefty Hauler skill feat. This background gives the party +1 reputation with the Sandpoint Mercantile League, but -1 reputation with the Scarnetti Consortium. The Eager Scofflaw background represents characters who are considered troublemakers by the Sandpoint authorities. Your character is a prankster, or petty criminal who hasn't been meaningfully arrested or imprisoned, at least not yet. You generally know your way around the local underworld and have experience palming valuable objects and getting by locked doors. Your character is probably on poor terms with any family they might have in town, and might have moved out of their familial home. Your character is trained in thievery and underworld lore, and gains the Bon Mot skill feat. This background gives the party +1 reputation point with the Bunyip Club faction, but -1 reputation point with the Town Watch. The Lost Coast Local is an especially broad background which represents characters who are native to the Lost Coast of Varisia, likely either as citizens of Sandpoint itself or as members of the Varisian caravans traveling up and down the coast between Magnamar and Riddleport. Your character is generally knowledgeable about local culture and history, and is also well acquainted with the peoples of the region. Your character could live anywhere in town, so work with your GM to figure out a good location based on your specific backstory. In addition to being trained in society and Sandpoint lore, your character gains the Hobnobber skill feat. This background gives the party +1 reputation with the townsfolk, but -1 reputation with the Scarnetti Consortium. The militia member background represents characters associated with the legal authorities in Sandpoint. Your character has worked with the Town Watch in the past, and has been trained as a reservist dedicated to the community's defense. Their past experience has largely been on the docks, either keeping watch on arriving or departing ships, or observing sailors as they pass through town to ensure they don't cause trouble. Your character could live anywhere in town, so work with your GM to figure out a good location based on your backstory. You're trained in athletics and sailing lore, and also gain the Lie to Me skill feat. This background gives the party +1 reputation with the Town Watch, but -1 reputation with the Bunyip Club. The newcomer background is another extremely broad background, which represents characters who are recent arrivals to Sandpoint. Your character's arrival has caught the attention of the Scarnetti Consortium, who seem to be trying to recruit you as a field agent. By contrast, you have a fascination with something about Sandpoint or the surrounding region, and that is your primary motivation for visiting the town. Your character might have settled into housing offered to them at a discount by the Scarnettis, or might be bunking near one of the several libraries in town. They are trained in diplomacy and library lore, and gain the Additional Lore feat in a lore subcategory of your choosing, relating to your interests in the region. This background gives the party +1 reputation point with the Scarnetti Consortium, but -1 reputation point with the townsfolk. The Runelord Scholar background represents characters who wish to become a scholar of ancient Thassilon, the lost civilization which has surged in relevance in recent years. This was in large part due to the heroes whose adventure began in Sandpoint just a few years ago. Your character is eager to join the Rune Watchers, the scholars of Thassilonian history in town, and you've already worked with them a few times. Your character might live anywhere in town, but their home is likely filled with books, scrolls, and suspected ancient artifacts. In addition to being trained in arcana and academia lore, they gain the multilingual skill feat, though one of the languages they can choose must be Thassilonian. This background gives the party +1 reputation with the Rune Watchers, but -1 reputation with the townsfolk. Finally, the Scarnetti Connected background represents characters who have some connection to the Scarnetti family, who are rumored to have criminal connections. Whether you want this connection or not is up to you, but it is well known among the people of Sandpoint. In recent months, the conflict between the Scarnettis and the Sandpoint Cathedral has been heating up, which has blown back upon your character, regardless of your level of involvement. They might live in housing associated with the Scarnetti family or their agents. In addition to being trained in intimidation and mercantile lore, you gain the Charming Liar skill feat. This background gives the party +1 reputation with the Scarnetti Consortium, but -1 reputation with the Sandpoint Cathedral. My party. I want to close out this discussion on character creation with a sample party of 5 characters which I would propose for this AP. These characters will lean into my own personal tastes and my strong desire for thematic connection to the AP material and interpersonal interaction. This is as much a mental exercise for me as it is a tool for inspiration for you, the audience. Just like last time, let me know in the comments what you think of this as an idea. This party consists of 5 characters: 2 humans born and raised in Sandpoint, an Ayuvaran raised in Sandpoint since childhood, a goblin who came to Sandpoint as a child and grew up there, and a human Nephilim raised in town since childhood. The first member of my party is Garrick Trask, a human of Taldan descent who grew up in Sandpoint. Garrick is a militia member in town who was a child when the events of Burnt Offerings occurred. These events inspired his dedication to defending the community, which he supplemented with a faith in Abadar. A talented brawler, Garrick relies on his fists in combat, grappling and pummeling his opponents into submission. He's a gymnast swashbuckler, and in a free archetype game would take feats from the wrestler archetype. His primary skill focus is on athletics, stealth, and acrobatics. Outside of the dungeon crawl, Garrick's goal is to get married to the woman he's been courting for the last year. To that end, he spends much of his downtime working on the docks to earn some extra coin, or repairing his home in town. The next member of the party is Grenke, a goblin whose family settled in town several years ago when he was a child. Grenke is a descendant of one of the minor tribes who were subjugated by the Thistletop goblins 17 years ago. Despite their status as goblins, Grenke's family worked their way into the town's good graces, eventually earning him a position as the apprentice to Volioker Bristlebird, the local locksmith. Unfortunately, Grenke's interest couldn't be contained by locksmithing and tinkering. The tales of the Thistletop goblins always haunted him, especially the stories of the magical Nualia. He felt compelled to unravel the mystery of her corruption and the strange goings-on in the region. Grenke is a thaumaturge, and his amulet implement is actually an ancient Sihedron amulet, just like those carried by the Sandpoint heroes, though this one's magic appears to have faded over the millennia. Up next is Ezrina Miratz, the resident Thassilon nerd and the brains of the party. Ezrina is the daughter of a local human Varisian family, and has been fascinated with the ruins of Thassilon since childhood. Her fascination only deepened after she made contact with a strange spirit of unknown origin who spoke to her through an owl whose wings bore strange runic markings. Ezrina is a witch, with the Inscribed One patron. In a free archetype game, she would take feats from the Loremaster archetype. Outside of combat, her goals in town are to join the Runewatcher faction, and to craft magic items under their tutelage. Darbias Tuttle, called Darby by his friends, is a human Ayuvaran raised in the local area in a family of former grain mill owners. Darby spent his childhood traveling between local farms and the town, moving grain, supporting farm families, and negotiating with merchants in town. His inherent magical power, however, also allowed him to bond with the spirits in the region, until recently, when he came into contact with a strange apparition whose origin he can't yet explain. Darby is an animist, with the Crafter in the Vault apparition. He's devoted to the well-being of the town and is a worshipper of Erastil. In a free archetype game, he would take feats from the Medic archetype. Outside of combat, Darbias will get involved in local elections and referendums, and eventually might even run for mayor of the town. Finally, Mivella Verrain rounds out the party. Mivella has lived in town since her mother sought sanctuary in the cathedral after fleeing a hard life in Magnamar. She was raised as an acolyte in the church, and is a devout but militant follower of Desna. Her Nephilim heritage has been kept a secret from the town by her mother and Abstelar Xantus, but it gives her a complicated view of the historic Nualia. She sees Nualia as a sympathetic victim of the town's bigotry, but also as a villain who gave Nephilim a bad name. Mivella is a Vindicator Ranger of Desna, and in a free archetype game she would take feats from the Cleric archetype. Outside of combat, her goals in town involve softening the townsfolk view of Nualia, while working toward taking over the cathedral as Father Xantus's successor. Looking at the team dynamics, Darby takes up the role of the leader, using his level head and talent for understanding to smooth over any disagreements between his companions. He keeps his friends focused on the well-being of the town. Garrick, meanwhile, is Darby's right hand, the reliable anchor of the group who provides muscle and humor in equal measure. He's contrasted by Mivella, the lancer of the party, who struggles with vengeful impulses and a fast temper. She struggles to follow Darby's generally careful approach to adventuring, especially when others are in danger. Ezrina is similarly quick to action, but due more to her own eagerness than any sense of righteousness. Ezrina struggles to balance her own curiosity against the well-being of herself or her teammates, but trusts them to get her out of any trouble she finds. Rounding out the group is Grenke, the emotional core of the group who does most of the talking. He endears himself to Mivella over their shared sense of ostracism in Sandpoint, while sharing an obsession with obscure lore with Ezrina. GM Advice, or how might I run this? Warning: the following section is intended for GMs only. If you are planning to play in this adventure path, I suggest stopping the video now. I'll need to discuss some spoilers to properly address my suggested adjustments to this adventure. You've been warned. Alright, to begin this section, let me just say, I really like this AP for what it is. Dungeon crawls aren't my personal favorite style of campaign, but for a dungeon crawl, this one is really well handled. For that reason, the advice I have is pretty limited in scope. Like all dungeon crawls, this AP has the opportunity to become a meat grinder, but to repeat a phrase I used earlier, that's definitely more of a feature than a bug. First up, the AP presents a method by which the PCs can utilize teleportation devices beneath Sandpoint to warp into the pit, bypassing the need for overland travel and giving you a handy tool to hand-wave away unnecessary travel time or random wilderness encounters. If your players are having a tough time discovering this on their own, I suggest using the Rune Watcher faction to point out the possibility. I don't think you should just hand it to the PCs, necessarily. Just use the Rune Watchers to prompt the PCs to investigate the opportunity. That said, I wouldn't just prompt this right away in the AP. Let the PCs explore the pit for a few floors first. That way, eliminating the overland travel will feel like it meaningfully eases their further explorations. The book mentions this as an option, but I just want to emphasize it again here. Up next, Seven Dooms for Sandpoint has a lot of narrative and thematic parallels to other Paizo APs, most notably Abomination Vaults and Season of Ghosts. Both of these APs have been around for a while, and have been very well received. Both are set in small towns with tight-knit communities, which the PCs are expected to interact with. This makes both of them potential resources for inspiration. In particular, I want to highlight the Abomination Vaults Expanded supplement on Pathfinder Infinite as a great source of inspiration for side quests, especially since Magnamar can easily stand in for Absalom when adapting the stories to Seven Dooms. Abomination Vaults proper can also be a great source of additional traps, hazards, and even individual enemies which can be picked up and dropped into the pit without too much trouble. Season of Ghosts, meanwhile, is a great source of NPC interactions, mystery encounters, and downtime activities, which could inspire new plotlines in Sandpoint. The last thing I want to note for Seven Dooms for Sandpoint is that this AP is definitely intended for players and GMs who've been to Sandpoint before. This is very much a sequel to Burnt Offerings, and the broader Rise of the Runelords campaign. If your group has played that AP before, this is a fantastic follow-up, and will likely be a great trip down memory lane for you and your friends. That said, if your group has never been to Sandpoint before, then you might want to tone down the nostalgia. The AP can definitely stand on its own, but certain plot lines will need further exploration or explanation in order to hit effectively. You might need to introduce some sort of flashback mechanic in order to help the players understand the late unpleasantness, or the events of Burnt Offerings. If you're trying to decide if Seven Dooms for Sandpoint is the right AP for your group, then I think it is in direct competition with both Abomination Vaults and Season of Ghosts. Seven Dooms is certainly a dungeon crawl, and if I'm comparing apples to apples against Abomination Vaults, then I really need to give Abomination Vaults the edge. Vaults is just a tiny bit better, in large part because the longer runtime allows it a little more time to breathe and mature. If your group is deciding between Dooms and Vaults, and no one in the group has ever played in Sandpoint before, then Vaults would be my recommendation. That said, if half or more of your group has played in Sandpoint before, then Seven Dooms will absolutely be the better experience. Now, comparing Seven Dooms to Season of Ghosts is a bit more difficult. Dooms is a dungeon crawl, and Ghosts is a horror mystery. That said, both present the PCs with a close-knit community with whom they can interact. Again, if your group is deciding between Dooms and Ghosts, and no one in the group has ever played in Sandpoint before, then Ghosts would be my recommendation. Actually, Ghosts would just be my recommendation all the time because it's one of my favorites, but that's beside the point. Now, if your group has played Rise of the Runelords before, then Paizo's been pretty hard at work lately to bring your team a fantastic closeout to that story. 2 sequels to Rise of the Runelords have been released in recent years. 7 Dooms for Sandpoint is a direct sequel to Burnt Offerings, and some elements of Books 3 and 4. It closes out the story of the town, bringing a sense of closure to probably the most iconic setting in all of Pathfinder. Meanwhile, Revenge of the Runelords is the conclusion to the now 4-part Runelords saga, and the conclusion of the story which kicked off 18 years ago in the streets of Sandpoint. These 2 APs bring the entire narrative of Pathfinder full circle, and feel like a conclusion which has been built up for nearly 20 years. But do I consider running 7 Dooms as a prequel to Revenge of the Runelords to be a good idea? Maybe? It's really dependent on your group. I think it could work for some groups, but generally speaking, I think the themes of the 2 APs are just a little too contradictory to work smoothly as 2 halves of a combined narrative for a consistent party. I like the idea of leaving 7 Dooms as a local story, with the heroes ultimately remaining powerful but local heroes. Similarly, Revenge of the Runelords is better thought of as an epic-level adventure, the story of gods and monsters, which takes players and PCs to places we haven't been to mechanically since the end of Wrath of the Righteous. I much prefer the idea of running these 2 APs back-to-back with separate parties of PCs. This allows the narratives to remain separate while still tying a complete bow on the Runelords saga. But I'll get into that a little more at the end of the Merry Little SinMas with my Revenge of the Runelords video. Well, if you still want to play the 7 Dooms for Sandpoint adventure path, that should be enough information to get you started. I strongly encourage you to read the player's guide which Paizo has put together. Again, it's totally free and I've linked it below. This AP is a ton of fun for players who visited Sandpoint before, and is a nostalgia-fueled road trip back to where it all began. While it stands on its own as a really solid AP for new players, it's best experienced as an overdue sequel to Burnt Offerings. I gotta say, as someone who played through Rise of the Runelords, I really liked it. Well, that's it for the first SinMas video of 2025. I certainly hope you've enjoyed it. Next week, the Merry Little SinMas continues with the first of my campaign summary videos, where I explain the plot of the legendary AP Rise of the Runelords. I hope you stick around. Thanks for watching, and I wish you all a Merry Little SinMas.